At midnight, my stepfather broke into my army quarters, dislocating my shoulder and leaving me bloodied art while my mother watched in silence. I sentence so's then collapsed. What followed stunned even the military. The pounding rattled my door like a battering ram, each strike shaking the frame until the lock cracked. Then the door gave way, slamming against the wall. In the glow of the hallway light stood Richard Kane, my stepfather, his face red with alcohol and fury. He stumbled forward, shouting through clenched teeth, "You've betrayed this family, Emily. Tonight you'll learn what loyalty costs." Before I could react, his weight crashed into me, driving me back into the bookshelf. Pain exploded through my shoulder with a sickening pop. My body buckled ribs, screaming as he struck again. Behind him in the half-light stood my mother, Margaret. Her hands clutched her face, her body trembling, eyes wide with terror, but she did not move toward me. She did not speak. She just stood there silent, watching as my body crumpled to the floor. That silence pierced deeper than his fists. "My name is Captain Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, a U.S. Army combat medic stationed at Fort Bragg. I have dragged wounded soldiers out of burning vehicles under fire, set bones on the floor of field hospitals, and stitched torn skin in the sandstorms of Afghanistan. I have seen men bleed out in minutes, but nothing in war had ever prepared me for the war that came through my own door that night." Richard's hand tangled in my hair, yanking me up, his knuckles driving across my cheekbone until stars burst in my vision. My shoulder dangled, useless pain screaming with every breath. I tried to push back, but his size dwarfed mine, the air filled with the stench of whiskey and the echo of his voice low and venomous. "You'll never escape me, girl. Family is forever." My mother's sobs broke through, muffled behind her hands. For a fleeting second our eyes locked. I begged silently, "Please help me." But she stayed frozen, her silence louder than any scream. I thought of the nights we used to sing together when I was a child, her voice carrying me to sleep. That voice was gone now, trapped in fear. Blood trickled into my mouth. My knees gave way. But through the haze, I saw the olive green radio on my desk, the one I carried home from the base after late shifts. Crawling on my side, I lunged, every rib protesting. Richard's boot slammed against my back, but my fingers found the switch. 3 quick presses, the emergency signal. Somewhere miles away, military police would see my coordinates light up. Richard didn't notice. His rage consumed him. He lifted me again and slammed me into the wall, promising I would regret ever leaving his house, his rules. My vision narrowed, a tunnel of light and sound fading fast. Yet beneath the roar of my stepfather's voice, I thought I heard it, the faint crackle of a response over the radio. Hope, thin as thread, pulsed in that sound. And in that moment, even as pain swallowed me, I knew this night would not end in silence. It would end with the truth breaking through. When I lay there on the floor that night, the copper taste of blood filling my mouth, my mind betrayed me by pulling me backward, back to the years when my world still felt safe. Pain has a way of stirring memory. I saw my stepfather again, not in uniform this time, but kneeling on the living room carpet holding a tiny flag while I stumbled through the words of the national anthem. He laughed softly when I forgot a line, then started over, guiding me with his strong, steady voice. He was a Navy veteran, stern with himself, but endlessly gentle with me. I thought that steadiness would last forever, but forever ended when I was 8. A sudden heart attack took him in the middle of a late shift, and just like that, the man who taught me to be brave was gone. The house fell silent, stripped of his laughter and the security that came with it. My mother Margaret tried to be both parents at once, but I could see the cracks in her spirit. She went from singing in the kitchen to sitting alone at night, staring at bills, her hands trembling when she thought I wasn't looking. It was during those fragile years that Richard Kane appeared, a former logistics officer, tall and commanding, the kind of man people noticed when he entered a room. He brought with him the confidence of someone who claimed to understand order and discipline. To my mother, still grieving and desperate for stability, he must have seemed like a rescue. To me, he was a stranger who moved too quickly into our lives. I will never forget that first dinner. Richard arrived with a bouquet of lilies for my mother, the kind she hadn't received in years. For me, he carried a stuffed bear dressed in miniature fatigues. My mother's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before my father died, her cheeks flushed with something that looked dangerously like hope. I remember watching her smile, radiant and alive again, and knowing I should have felt glad. Instead, I felt a cold knot in my chest. That bear sat on my shelf for years, staring at me with stitched eyes, a reminder that someone new had stepped into the space where my father's memories still lived. Even as a child, I sensed that this gift was not about me. It was about winning ground, planting a flag in the quiet grief of our home. And though my mother welcomed him with open arms, I knew then in a way words could not yet explain that the light in our house had shifted. it would never shine the same again. It is strange how memory works. That night on the floor of my apartment with Richard's fists landing like hammers, I kept seeing the earlier version of him, the one the world saw, the one my mother believed in. After my father's death, Richard had entered our lives wrapped in politeness. He told war stories at the dinner table, stories polished smooth, never too dark, always just enough to impress. He stood tall, always in pressed shirts, his voice calm and measured. When he moved us into his spacious house in New Jersey, my mother called it a blessing. To neighbors, he was the perfect gentleman. To my mother, he was safety after years of struggle. But slowly, the mask slipped. It began with small things, questions about who my mother spent her afternoons with, remarks about her clothing, comments disguised as concern. Then he suggested she close her bank account, saying families should share everything. I watched her hand over her independence with barely a protest. His charm with others never faltered, but inside the house he set the rules and rewrote every part of our lives. The woman who once hummed while cooking no longer sang. The red lipstick she wore on Sundays disappeared into the back of a drawer. She walked softer, as though even the sound of her footsteps needed permission. I saw her friends fade from our doorstep one by one until the phone stopped ringing altogether. I learned to measure the mood of the house by the silence that hung in the air. One night when I was 14, I understood fully what lived beneath Richard's calm surface. My mother had bought a simple dress, cheap, nothing extravagant. She wore it into the dining room, smiling timidly, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be. Richard's expression hardened. Without warning, he hurled his dinner plate against the wall, the sauce dripping down like blood across the pale wallpaper. He roared that she was irresponsible, wasteful, ungrateful. My mother shrank before him, stammering apologies, promising to return the dress. I sat frozen staring at the medal that had fallen from the mantel in the chaos, a Navy medal that had belonged to my father. Richard picked it up, sneered, and threw it to the floor. His voice was cold. Final, I'm the only man in this house now. It was in that moment, watching my mother bow her head in silence and my father's medal lying tarnished on the carpet, that I realized Richard was not a protector. He was a conqueror and our home was his territory. The mask had shattered and the eyes that glared at me across the room were not those of a man, they were the eyes of a predator. The night Richard threw my father's medal to the floor marked a turning point in me. I realized then that waiting for things to return to normal was a fantasy. Normal was gone, buried with my father. From that night forward, I understood that if I wanted air to breathe, I would have to carve it out myself. High school became my battleground. While other kids lingered in hallways or laughed in the cafeteria, I poured myself into the junior ROTC program. Marching drills at dawn, endless push-ups, running until my lungs burned, I welcomed it all. The ache in my muscles was cleaner than the pain of home. Sweat drowned out the echo of Richard's voice. Discipline became a shield I could hold, a rhythm that pushed the darkness of my house further away, if only for a few hours at a time. It was in those years that I met Naomi Parker. She was quick-witted, sharp as glass, the kind of girl who saw through facades in a single glance. She asked once why I never invited her over. I laughed it off, but she didn't buy it. One evening after practice, I let the truth slip. Not the full weight of it, I couldn't bring myself to, but enough for her to see the outline of my prison. She never judged, never pitied. She simply became the one person I could exhale around. Sometimes that's all survival really needs: one witness who knows you aren't crazy, who believes you. At home, the shadows deepened. My mother had become a ghost in her own body. She moved softly, spoke little, always with her eyes lowered. When I begged her to stand up for herself, she would only whisper, "You don't understand military men, Emily. He's strict, but he loves us. This is how they are." Each time she said it, I felt something inside me splinter. She called it love, but I knew better. It was fear, wearing a mask too heavy to take off. So I built my own vow in silence. I promised myself that the moment I could leave, I would never come back. I would not vanish like my mother had. I would not let Richard's rules become the definition of family. My escape wasn't going to be loud or dramatic. It was going to be steady, disciplined, inevitable. Every push-up, every mile, every drill was a step toward freedom. And in the stillness of my room at night, with the stuffed bear in uniform staring down from the shelf, I whispered a single promise: I will get out. I will never let him win. Leaving that house felt like stepping out of a cave after years of breathing stale air. When my acceptance letter from West Point arrived, I packed my duffel in silence, not trusting myself to speak. The morning I left, Richard barely looked up from his paper. My mother hugged me tightly, her arms trembling, whispering words I couldn't quite hold on to. I told myself I was free. But freedom is more complicated than distance. At the academy, discipline became something else, no longer a shield, but a path forward. I poured myself into every drill, every field exercise, every late-night study session until exhaustion was the only way I knew to rest. Years later, I traded cadet grays for Army greens and became a combat medic. Afghanistan taught me the kind of lessons no classroom could. I held pressure on wounds while mortars fell close enough to shake the ground. I dragged soldiers heavier than me through dust and blood-stitched, torn flesh with trembling hands that had no time to hesitate. Out there, survival was measured in seconds and sometimes in miracles. It was in that desert that I met Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. Sharp-tongued, fearless, the kind of medic who laughed in the face of chaos. She became my anchor in the storm. And then there was Captain James Walker, Special Forces. He carried himself with quiet strength, a steadiness that reminded me of my father. Over months of missions and nights under a foreign sky, I let myself believe I could feel more than just survival. But even halfway across the world, the ghosts followed me. Every phone call home carried the same tremor in my mother's voice. She insisted she was fine, but the pauses between her words said otherwise. Silence has a weight, and hers pressed heavy through every static-filled line. I couldn't stand it, so I mailed her brochures from a military spouse's support center, numbers she could call, safe places she could go. Richard found them. His rage traveled faster than any bullet. One night, my phone buzzed with a message from him: "Stay out of my house. If you ever interfere again, I won't just deal with her. I'll come for you too." Reading those words in a dusty tent lit by a single lantern, I felt the war shift. It wasn't just overseas anymore. It had followed me, clawing across oceans, reminding me that some battles don't end when you leave home. Some shadows cross borders, waiting for the day you're forced to face them head-on. The threat in Richard's message lingered in the back of my mind like the constant hum of an engine you can't shut off. I tried to bury myself in work in the chaos of the field, but some nights the silence of the desert only magnified his shadow. Then came the call. The one that broke me more than any wound I'd treated on the battlefield. It was late, the camp quiet except for the distant rumble of generators. My sat phone buzzed. When I answered, all I heard at first was wind and a trembling voice. "Emily," my mother whispered, as if someone might be listening. "He knows. He destroyed the house phone. He said, if you ever reach out again, he'll kill you." I pressed the receiver so tightly my knuckles whitened. My voice cracked as I begged Mom, "Listen to me. Come to the base. I'll arrange clearance. You'll be safe here. I'll protect you." Her breath shook on the other end. I could almost see her standing at some dark street corner by a payphone, looking over her shoulder. "No, baby," she said, her voice breaking like thin glass. "You don't understand. He always finds us. Always. You have to live, Emily. Just you. That's enough for me." And then she was gone. The line went dead, leaving only the hollow static of world that had closed its doors. I sat there in the tent, staring at the shadows on the canvas walls, feeling like the little girl clutching a stuffed bear all over again, helpless, unseen. But training doesn't allow you to sit with helplessness for long. The next morning I sought out Major David Harris, our Judge Advocate General Officer. He was a man who measured his words, the kind whose calm made you believe in rules even when chaos reigned. I told him everything: my mother's call, Richard's threats, the history that had stalked me across continents. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed steady. He promised to review what could be done legally, though even he admitted the reach of military law had limits when it came to a civilian stepfather stateside. Later in the medic tent I found Sarah. She listened without interruption, then gripped my shoulder with the kind of force that said she'd already decided if Richard came, she'd stand in his way too. That night I lay awake beneath the foreign stars, realizing the cruel truth. Hope had flickered for a moment, only to be snuffed out by my mother's fear. But fear cuts both ways. Richard thought he had silenced her. What he didn't know was that her words had lit something else inside me, a refusal to remain his prisoner even from half a world away. The night ended with red and blue lights flashing against the rain-slicked windows of my quarters, the sound of boots pounding through the hall, and Richard's hands finally torn from me. He was still shouting when they dragged him out, still spitting rage even as the cuffs bit into his wrists. The air reeked of alcohol and ironed my blood on his skin. I sat against the wall chest, heaving, ribs aching with each breath, and watched the storm inside our home finally break. But what struck me most wasn't his capture. It was my mother. Margaret stood frozen in the corner, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her body trembling. She had not lifted a hand to stop him. Even when the MPs pushed Richard into the hall, she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the floor, and when they asked her to testify to confirm what had just happened, she shook her head slowly. "He's still my husband," she whispered. He didn't mean it. Those words pierced deeper than any of Richard's blows. For years I had told myself she was a victim like me, trapped, powerless. But in that moment, I saw something harder to accept. She had chosen silence. She had chosen him. And maybe she always would. At the hospital, as they stitched the gash above my eyebrow and wrapped my ribs, James arrived straight from deployment. He stood at my bedside, fury and grief battling in his eyes, his hand gripping mine so tightly I felt the tremor in his bones. "Never again," he said, voice low but steady. "He will never touch you again." Major Harris visited the next day with a folder thick with reports. Richard's arrest wasn't just about one night. It opened a record: long ignored charges, buried complaints, silenced. This time, the system would not look away. For once the law carried weight heavier than Richard's fists, and yet beneath the relief, I grieved. Not for Richard, he was nothing but a shadow now, but for my mother, who had been standing in that corner her whole life, mistaking submission for survival. I realized then that saving her was never within my power. What I could save was myself. When I stepped out of that hospital days later, uniform crisp despite the bandages beneath, the air felt different. I was not the child who whispered promises in the dark. I was a soldier who had survived both battlefields, foreign and domestic. And as the flag outside the base snapped in the wind, I understood the truth I had been running toward all my life. Freedom was never given. It was claimed. The first thing I felt when I woke in military hospital wasn't the bandages or the ache in my ribs. It was James' hand wrapped around mine, steady and warm. On the other side of the bed stood Sarah, arms crossed, her sharp eyes, softer than I'd ever seen them. And beside her, Major Harris, holding a folder that seemed to carry the weight of everything I had fought to keep buried. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. When my mother walked into the room, I braced myself for silence. Instead, her shoulders shook and her words spilled out like a dam finally broken. She admitted what I had known and yet needed to hear: 15 years of bruises, fear and choices made in the name of protecting me. She believed that if she stayed quiet, bore the weight herself, Richard's rage would spare me. But her silence had not saved me. It had only drawn me deeper into the fire. Tears blurred her face, but this time she did not look away. The courtroom was colder than any tent I had slept in overseas. Richard appeared polished in a sharp suit, as if civility itself could erase what he had done. He painted me as unstable, accused me of exaggeration, of betrayal, but the evidence stacked against him was a fortress. The SOS signal from my radiomedical records documenting every fracture, my mother's testimony, all of it formed a wall his lies couldn't climb. When the judge read the sentence, 20 years in federal prison with his military honors stripped, Richard's mask finally cracked. I saw not a commander, not even a man, but the hollow fury of someone who had lost control for the last time. From that wreckage, I chose to build. Alongside Sarah, I founded Valor Shield, an organization dedicated to connecting service members and families living under the shadow of domestic violence. James took charge of logistics, making sure no one who reached out would face silence at the other end of the line. And my mother, tentative but determined, began volunteering at the Veterans Hospital, her voice slowly returning. The first time she sang the national anthem at a parade, her voice strong and clear, I felt a circle close. Months later, standing before a hall of military doctors and cadets, I spoke words I once never thought I'd say aloud. Silence never protected anyone. We are only safe when we have the courage to tell the truth. The applause rose, but I didn't need it. What mattered was the stillness inside me. The knowledge that the war I had carried for decades was no longer mine alone. I had spoken, and in that truth, I had finally claimed my freedom. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share how it made you feel in the comments, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Your words and your presence mean more than you know. Don't forget to hit subscribe to Relative Tension so you won't miss the next story that might speak right to your heart. Let's keep this conversation alive together.